Roy with the
We're live. Okay. Everyone hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so this is Unity Theory meeting number 1. We can. How should we start this? Should I just kind of recap everything so that if anyone watching will really understand what we're talking about?
James, your name is Kali here.
No, my name is Callie.
Or Kali.
Yeah,
I'm the destroyer of illusion.
I like that.
That's the someone in the
Hindu.
Hindu. All right.
That would make me. I'd like to be Shiva. Shiva is the creator and destroyer of worlds.
I should have picked Shiva first because Shiva's even more kick-ass than Callie.
He is, but he's paradoxical. Doesn't he create and destroy the world at the same time? Right? So very suitable. All right. So unity theory. I think I'm going to start with. I've laid it all out here. I'm going to start with this here. So we got to begin with talking about theories. You guys can see my screen?
I cannot.
Okay, let me share. Yeah, present. Share screen. All right. And there we are. Okay, so to talk about unity theory, you necessarily have to begin by talking about theories in general, a theory of everything. And so I've laid out here the theory types. We have the first one, which is identitarian. So this, I believe, is what Roy's is, the triune system. It's simply just this, like, naming the greatest level of reality, the absolute truth. So what identity does it have? By giving it a name, you've described it. You've given it an identity. So the second one is functional. So because this identity seems to act, there is an action there immediately as soon as it becomes self-aware. There is a function that occurs. So this is something that needs to be described from a human-centric point of view, which is dualistic. We are beings of differentiation, as Jung would say. So functional is necessarily, contrast. There's always two parts, mechanics basically of everything. The third is predictive, meaning patterns, recognizing patterns, extrapolating into the future, seeing into the past, that sort of thing. So I would say science, the scientific method, that's really predictive. So when people want to reconcile quantum mechanics with classical physics, it's predictive. The model, like the scientific method, is predictive. And so it will never reach a theory of everything completely, precisely because it remains in the predictive type of theory, or it uses just a predictive model. It doesn't use a metaphysical sort of like cognition-based method. And the functional method of creating a theory does. So this is why you necessarily need all three types, and elements of all three will exist within all three. So it's kind of interesting. So then the only thing that is required is the fourth type, which is really just a self-description, which is ironic because that is what awareness does. It is a self-referential system, and therefore we need to do the same kind of self-reference. And this is what the fourth type of theory is. It's a complete theory simply because it's self-description. Any questions, any disagreements or anything so far? Have I lost you guys?
Nope.
No. Do you hear me?
Okay.
No.
So no disagreements, no nothing. Okay, great. Okay, so then the second part is just to align the two. This is why I have our theories here on the right. Truth is the absolute and singular state, so that's just what we're talking about. Triunity fits in as an identitarian theory because it encompasses truth by removing any kind of language or act and concept. So this is a non-conceptuality part of Roy's theory. And by the way, remember I said zero is also potential. You can add a third category, which is non-concept, right? So I had also written that in our group chat, which means that here it's 0, 1, potential, concept, and percept. So the two aspects of the dualism, and then in the infinite, it's infinity, and it's perception. It's all about perception. So anyway, moving on, paradoxism is really the functional theory, and it describes and reconciles everything. And from it also you can help generate action and technology, but only through the key of triunity and spiralism. Yeah, they all have to work together to try to understand how consciousness is moving forward and how we as individuals can be more aware, not to take action, but to allow action to happen, to allow the concepts that we need to arise. It's called flow state in psychology. You just don't know where it's coming from, but things are happening. This is what we're sort of working on here, but in a way that is it would be creating a framework that could be applicable to everything. And when I say everything, I mean things as abstract as love, and how like in communication and art, and how do you define art and beauty, to as pragmatic as engineering and mathematics, sciences, whatever.
I always got to throw in economics.
Economics, yeah, economics I believe would be huge here.
Yeah.
Things like Benford's law. I don't know if you know that, but the IRS uses Benford's law, and they're not even legally able to tell you that. Like they'll say we know nothing about that, and it's a mathematical axiom, right? And so more abstract things can be applicable to things like economics, like absolutely. So there it is. That's just the presentation, the beginning of unity theory, which is a unification of three other theories, which again I don't think is a coincidence. It's very clear. The triune distributes itself throughout the whole system always, and that by symmetry of identity, that means that duality distributes itself throughout the whole system as well always, which is why we're likely to find some patterns in spiralism. But spiralism is the infinite. Now it starts to describe infinity, so that's everything in between triune and duality and beyond all the other numbers. So you can see it as like almost larger cycles. It'll always return to triune / dual things, but in between times, this is where you don't see far enough. It'll appear as if though there are just some like straightforward facts and straightforward actions, and it has nothing to do with triune or dual. It's just sort of like this is why I think we experience a world where we can manipulate things, and there's more numbers. But ultimately, I think that anything that you think is just a sequence of numbers and it has nothing to do with duality or triality is in itself probably couched in a greater triune / dual cycle. I know it's really abstract.
There's a meaning to the numbers. They're not just numbers.
Exactly.
They're relating to this deeper truth.
Yeah, because we see that the number line does collapse back to the zero potential. And to collapse back to the zero potential, it necessarily has to go through the triality / duality axioms. And so that's why I believe that trio-duality, let's call it, will distribute itself and recreate that pattern throughout all of infinity and all the other numbers. In any case, that's just the beginning of the theory. And here's the semantic definition. Now I was wondering if I should just let the two of you, because I've already presented it in that first half hour, but I was really tired and I did a shitty job. But do you guys want to attack this instead of me?
No, I don't. You're a far better speaker, orator than I am.
I cannot present this yet.
Okay, so I'm going to present it.
But I do understand it. Like I've listened to it 4 times now, and now it's finally starting to set in.
Okay, so I'm going to present it as simply as I can, but at the same time, I'm going to try. I'm going to try to derive some more like layman's terms so that people could understand just how practically applicable this is to everything. But ultimately, Roy, you pointed out that 1, 2, and 3 is confusing, and it is. So I'm going to have to change that at some point. But this is just to number the columns, that we have 3 columns. And it's also to just reflect back at you just how trial everything is.
Well, I think it's pretty self-evident that it's all threes. Everything we're looking at is like that.
Yeah, you're right. It is.
Three
Yeah.
grid. So the numbers do confuse it a little bit.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I think the actual meaning is the 0 and the negative and the positive. That's what it's fundamentally getting to. That's the fundamental expression. Is the positive and the negative and the 0.
Yeah,
I
you're
think
right.
you don't need the numbers there actually. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, and also I'm realizing as I see it that it kind of messes up with the duality, because here's the beauty on this chart. It's perfectly integrated. You have 1, 2, and 3. You have one, so you have 3 columns, three rows, and within each column and row you have a dual aspect, right? So you have here negative, positive, but negative is a superposition, and positive reflects the infinity. So infinity projects forward, right? It's all about creation, and superposition is it's a canceling out, right? So through the superposition you get back to 0 potential.
So I just want to say that
go ahead.
the bias of attention that you give to that superposition is what creates it, right? When you're perfectly balanced, the positive and the negative cancel each other out, and there's no creation. But if you look a little bit more, if you pay just a little more attention to one than the other, that's what sets it all in motion.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So this dual aspect kind of recreates itself in the very first axiom. So what this 0 is doing is it's also in a state of superposition, which creates infinity, and once
it's no, sorry. The 0 isn't in a state of superposition. It is the state of superposition.
It is, yeah, you're right. It is the superposition.
It's an important distinction.
You're right. It's a very subtle but important distinction. We had talked about that before that. So it is the superposition, but superposition from the human-centric point of view on the other side is like the qualia maybe of 0 as a superposition is what we have here. So anyway, the point is, because it generates a world, which is infinity here, in this world, like then it generates axioms, right? Axioms around which this world behaves, but also it's an axiom by which it anchors the world to itself, because it is itself. Okay, and that's why you have to think about everything always collapsing back down to this 0. And so this axiom, which is 0 potential, like that's why I put it here, right? Even though we're going one step further, like this level here is absolute potential. It's nothing that can be described, and this is the metaphysical world here. So it's an existence that exists beyond physics. So you have to unchain yourself from this idea of space-time being the only physics construct, or the only existential construct. So by existential, I'm just talking about thought. So thought can exist, and it pre-exists the physical world. So that's why we call it metaphysics, beyond the physical world. So here we have that first axiom. Now again, because everything collapses into each other by symmetry of identity, everything projects from itself as well. So it's kind of like like a worm that grows from within itself, right? It projects outwards from itself, which is why the second axiom comes through thought. So thought thinks the world into existence, right? All this stuff, it's accurate what our religions have been saying. So that second axiom is the qualia of the 0, which is a superposition, right? And so that's why I have the second axiom here. We're just using duality to separate the potential to start to understand what it is. But ultimately, it's not a separate. There is no separation there. It's just that it separates itself to create a world. And this is a ad infinitum cycle. That's why I have here, the cycle. So, if we observe now, we go a bit further. That's very abstract. So now we're going to go into the actual semantics of it. How do we reconcile those abstract ideas with language? And how does it translate into language? Well, we have the first one, which is the cogito. I am thinking. The reason I'm changing it, because usually people say, I think, therefore I am. But even in the Latin, it's three things. It's cogito ergo sum, right? And also we have to think about this because everything collapsed. You can just say I am, and it's been said, right, in the Bible, for example, I am that I am, or just I am. And you can always just say I, right, as well. And you don't even have to say I, just pure potential. There's nothing to be said. So I'm just mentioning that for anyone watching. Okay, so that being said, I am thinking is the very first axiom. It's the cogito. And now any kind of axiom or any kind of a thought has to be defined. There goes another duality, right? So you need a definition to understand the identity of what you're trying to describe. That being said, the I is the very first identity. We're creating an identity when we say I. So the way I like to say it is, I is a function of identity. Am is a function of being, right? It's the same thing, except the difference comes from the human-centric view, which is personal and external. Which, of course, there is no separation there. Everything, like identity and pure potential, just one. But human beings are beings of differentiation, so that's why we've created the differentiation between am and being. Being is a state, and am is a personal state of being. So am is a function of being. Thinking is a function of thought. And that's very, very teleological. So it's a circular thing.
Yeah, you can. If you want to make it a little distinction there, you could put mind instead of thought. But
yeah, you could. But you're right. That would distinguish it a little bit more, so people would understand. But ultimately, thought, I think, is more succinct. It's like it's the more clean thing. So, what does it mean, like this function, identity, being, and thought? It's just separating not only in a dual manner. So you always see how there's like a dual mirroring and a triality mirroring. That's why you're seeing like two things and three things. So I, identity, am, being, thinking, thought. But you also have I, identity, am, being, thinking, thought that come together. So it's just to show you that the whole system collapses. Really, it's stable like this with these two axioms and the pure potential, but ultimately it all collapses in on itself from every point, which is kind of wild. And I also saw something else the other day that I haven't explored this yet and I haven't thought about it, but it may be so complete and integrated that there's a pattern here going diagonally. Yeah. So I'm gonna have to get to that later because I haven't thought about it enough. But the point is, this first axiom generates the second axiom. So let's go into the second one. I call it Roy's axiom because this is what you've contributed is happening. So we have the cogito and we have Roy's axiom. This is happening is a function of the very first axiom. So when you say I am thinking, that's the pure potential doing that. And then when we say this is happening, that's us, right, experiencing a world saying this world is happening, right? And ultimately, what is happening is Maya is thinking, right? The potential is happening, essentially. So from our point of view, we're saying this is happening. And from this point of view, we're saying I'm thinking. And really from this point of view at the top, nothing, like stop saying anything, right? And that's why Roy and I, for the first week or two, we're just always going around this round and round for a reason, because you're from that point of view and I was from both points of view, and this is where spirality comes in, right? But before we get to spirality, we're going to look at the semantic definition of this axiom. This is a function of object. Now, when we think of object, you have to think about what? Matter energy, because that's what objects are made of. And matter energy is the E equals mc squared, right? It's one thing. That's why I say matter energy. Maybe menergy would be a greater thing to say. I don't know. I don't think I'll coin that term. It doesn't
This
sound-
this could also be an event, an occurrence.
Yes. So movement, right?
So it's almost objective. It's almost an object in the fourth dimension. Like it's almost
I would say
an
it's more of a.
object that has time. Right? That's why there's the time in there too. There's a
I wouldn't
time.
say you're skipping ahead because you're right, but it's with happening. This is more of a position, and it's more of a position maybe.
Yeah, it brings attention to your immediate experience,
Exactly.
whatever you want to define that as.
So again, I want to say this because I kind of kicked myself for having forgotten in the last video. It's just so beautiful that Roy, like you're from this point of view. I think therefore I am. It's just beautiful that it's you that came up with this axiom, because again, this axiom comes from that axiom, and there's a superposition there as well. Anyway, kind of brilliant. So, all right, this is a function of an object, and an object is matter energy. Is a function of a state, and a state, you have to define what a state is here. It is everything up here. This is where I like to show people the collapse. A state is being, and being is potential, right? These are all the same. And that's when we say that there's a collapsing and that there's a projecting at the same time. There's all these different forms of the same thing. And that's why the spiral kind of just, goes out. Anyway, and so then we have happening. This is where space-time comes in. Space-time, same thing. It's just one thing. And happening is ultimately linked to the object, right? When we say this is happening, we're saying this is, which is a state. It's an object in a state. And because our experience of the world is that this object / state, which is in a state, is moving, it's in a fluidity. That's why we're saying happening. Happening is a function of time, because when we say happening, we're referring to the present moment. Therefore, it is a function of time, and time, of course, is the same thing as space. Therefore, we have space-time. So this is perfectly integrated. The semantic definition makes sense. It explains how it's related to what we're looking at here, guys, is the reconciliation between physics and metaphysics. And Daniel's triune here is the visual representation of the semantic definition, right? Like I said, here we have 0, 1, which is the same thing as superposition. We have infinity, which is the spiral, and we have 0, which is the potential.
Okay. I just need to interject here now because I've been holding this back for a while. So that triune with the 0 and the 1 and the 0, 1 and then the infinity, this fits absolutely perfectly with Hinduism's Brahman and Atman. So Brahman, right, is the 0. It's the absolute, which cannot be described. And then Atman, right, is the 1. So the 0 and the 1 is the relationship between Brahman and Atman. And Atman is, if you will, it's the perfect immediate reflection of Brahman looking in a mirror, right? And then once, so if someone takes, so again, and then the infinity is the ego that goes beyond Atman and starts, describing beyond the 1.
Yeah, it's the projection that happens when two mirrors are placed in front of each other, and that's what consciousness does. Consciousness is the mirror, and it's creating a mirror to look at itself, and it's just seeing itself infinitely in both ways, and that's where infinity gets generated.
So, and here's the thing about the 0 and 1 and how it leads to infinity is that the 0 cannot be described, but science keeps trying to fucking describe it, right? So if you describe the 0, or if you name it, if you can describe it, then you can count it, right? If it's a thing, if the 0 actually turns out to be a thing, then 0 and 1 all of a sudden turns into 2, doesn't it? So 0 always has to remain that which is undescribed, right? That which is undefined. And as soon as you try to define it, you end up with duality, because what 0 and 1 isn't 2, but if you think that 0 is something, then something plus something is 2.
Yeah.
Right? So
And
this is
undefined.
the illusion, the appearance of duality when you try to name the Brahman.
Exactly. And undefined to me is interchangeable with void or nothingness or,
Yes.
like, so,
It's just nothing that can be described. It's not our conventional understanding of
yeah.
complete void or non-existence, right?
Yeah. And so the parallel that you're drawing with Hinduism, we're going to see this in every, I mean, so many things. In Taoism, it's the way. It's,
Yep. Taoism
we're,
fits perfectly.
we're not the very first to understand these axioms. We may just be the very first to have given it the most clear logical semantic definition, and I don't know. And also, I'm guessing that on every level, I mean, this is going a bit further into the future, but on every level of like the new level of consciousness, right, the new higher state of awareness, the entity that emerges will necessarily have another kind of encompassment to make or another understanding to achieve. And so we may have just maybe achieved it for our level, but whatever's going to emerge from this achievement is going to be having to create its own model again, or it's going to have its own distinction or its own kind of theory of everything. So leads a perfect segue into infinity, which is spiralism. So this is where everything else comes.
I would ask
Yeah,
one thing before we start there,
sure.
because maybe it will help. Uh, Roy, do you hear us, or just should I wait a little?
Nope, I'm here.
All right, because I'm happy to wait. So,
Nope, good.
so basically, the question for you, James, because you understand this the best, because we just still understanding, but this is all, um, or at least I cannot present yet because I cannot retell for you. So my question, uh, so what we have currently, for my point of view, it is it is the one. We have everything at the same time. That's the one for me. It's in the past. I can describe it. That's towards the zero, and in the future, that is towards the infinity. But you always in the one, the present moment. So you
Yeah.
always in the now. But if you want to describe, or just use some semantics and language, you have to start from that point of view, and you will reach to zero and you will reach to infinity, like in a conceptual way. You cannot have zero and infinity as Roy describes. So how do you fit that, or clear me please out where this is fits?
Okay. This is the beauty of this Meta-Triune, which is what I'm calling it, right? Um, Look at this center column here.
Hmm.
There's zero, right? And it is a state. Zero is pure potential. Pure potential is a state, right? It's a being. It's what we call being, right? And that's the semantic definition. State is just the physics definition of being, and it keeps on going forever. We can keep adding lines with different statements or different observations about the world infinitely. Therefore, the spiral is this. What we're looking at here is the two first axioms, the two first levels of your spiral. Now you're looking at atoms, but pre-atoms, these are the two things you've been looking for that you can't look further. You're saying infinity. Well, there is a bit further. It's these two axioms. And so infinity feeds directly into zero. So there it is. You can see
All
it
right,
visually.
zero, one, infinity. All right. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And the perspective that I have is that you so the true self, the like who you really are, not the body mind complex or whatever you think you are,
Yeah.
is this, like, you are the superposition of mind body, right? Mind body spirit. You are the spirit. So actually you are the zero and you are the singularity,
Yeah.
but from an egoic perspective, you're looking outside into the singularity and you can't see fuck all, right? Because it's a singularity. But
because you're looking at it from
true self is always in the present, right? It's not, I don't even like using in the present. I like using presence, right? Because presence infers a consciousness, and consciousness is required for time. So yeah, you are always the presence that is the zero from which the spiral appears to spiral out from.
Exactly. So to give you an example there, the reason that we can't understand this like directly, that we have a hard time understanding, is let me just zoom out here. Okay, so these other levels that we have, like imagine more levels, these more lines.
Mm-hmm.
So we have atoms right here, atoms, and cells, and we have and so on. I mean, I really
Yeah.
should get my,
Okay.
yeah, I'm using my laptop, so it sucks. All right, so humans are really just a collection of these levels, and these levels are limited, right? They're really limited. So we have the perspective that emerges from the awareness, right? The awareness that emerges from the collection of these levels, right? That generates humans. And therefore, this is why we are perceiving these levels. We're able to perceive and understand these levels. But it's also because all these levels come from the pure potential. This is why we have the consciousness that we do, that can understand that there is only one thing, or we can even come up with concepts like infinity or zero, and we can't ever escape those things because we are those things. So we have a component in us. We are limited and unlimited at the same time. This is why my book's called Infinity Limited, right? Or that's why my equation is called the Infinity Limited. So we are in a superposition of being God and man at the same time. Yeah.
And just being on the surface of the earth is this condition, right? It's infinite. You can go around it infinitely, but it's limited.
Exactly.
So this expresses the redundancy of it all too, right? Because if you've experienced every single square foot on the planet, you can do it again in an infinite cycle. But again, it's just redundant, isn't it? So in this way, it's both limited and yet infinite. But there has to be a case. It has to be a case of redundancy in there. The redundancy has to be recognized.
Well, that's what you're saying. When you're saying there, it's infinite and limited, that's a paradox.
Yeah.
And of course, a paradox is what? It's just the experience in the human mind of where your perception ends and where the concept begins. So you have an awareness of the truth. You just can't perceive it because you are in the limited states. That's what the function that we're playing right now as human beings. But because we also have the concept, it proves that we are also the God or what I call universal self. So ultimately, you transcend the paradox and realize there is no paradox. There's just one absolute truth. And so with our language, we necessarily have to say things that are paradoxical. That leads us to the boundary of truth, is what I call it. Right? The paradox is the boundary of truth. By saying something that is contradictory, you're basically getting as far as you can get with your perception and starting your conception. So
that is so that is so good example, Roy. I will use that if you allow me to use.
Of course. Yeah.
Okay, so now we've described the semantic definition. We've reconciled here the definition of everything in a way. We require so when it comes to the spiral here, we require a geometric and mathematical reconciliation as well. Now, this here is the triune duality reconciliation. So it's just to understand the relationship between triality and duality. But after, we need to understand the relationship between numbers and geometry. So that's something that I've recently, my graphic designer, made all these graphics for me. And,
oh, wow.
Right? They're nice, right? So.
Oh, my goodness. La-ti-da. My graphic designer. I wish I had a graphic designer.
Well, it's my mother. So my mother is.
There you
so,
go. I can't even figure out how to put in text in WordPress.
Yeah.
It's a gong show, man.
I'm trying to find the
Wow.
the reconciliation between. Okay, yeah, well, here's what I was talking about, the perception and conception thing.
Your mom's right on.
It's good, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we did come up with one, but she hasn't made it yet. The reconciliation between numbers and geometry. Oh yeah, but there is another way to look at it, and it's this whole thing that I take you through here, which is if you split a zero-dimensional point, which is zero, the potential, then you have the duality that emerges, which is two zero-dimensional points, which, by the way, is already paradoxical, because if there's nothing, how can you have two nothingnesses? But that's what happens, is what consciousness does. Therefore, in between these two these two zero-dimensional points, or ZDPs, I call them, the first dimensional line emerges, and that's where numbers occur. And this because this splitting or this division that consciousness does to see itself, it only does it once, and that once is also infinite, right? Remember, we have infinity and always collapses back to one. So these two zero-dimensional points now are also divided at the same time, because again, there's an infinite division happening. Therefore, the two zero-dimensional points on the one-dimensional line are split, and it generates the two-dimensional surface. And this just keeps on going, right? And that's why
this is what I pointed out to you earlier, is that it's just a freaking game again, because you're splitting it, and then what happens? Well, it always collapses back to one, right? There's 2 points, and what do? You connect them into one, and you call that a line. And then you have 2 lines, and what do? Well, you connect them and call that a plane. And then you have 2 planes, and what do? It always collapses back to one, right?
Yeah. And that's the beauty of it, because one and everything. So the dimensions are created through the numbers, and this is just a physical representation. So if you do another splitting of the two-dimensional plane, you get the three-dimensional cube or space, and then you have to ask, what's the next one? Because it goes on infinitely, right? And that's what we call the hypercube or the tesseract, right? Now here's the collapse. So you're gonna like this part, Roy, because you're on that side of things. When you collapse it, here's what it looks like. Take two zero-dimensional points that are mutually opposite, so diametrically opposed, and when you align them, and I mean, like, take a cube and take an actual hypercube, or try to do it on a paper. Just draw it, right? Draw a hypercube, which is just a cube within a cube, right? And it's actually more than that. It's a cube that has a cube on all of its faces. So there's 6 faces to the cube. And look at the above cube here. It's like a squished cube. That's the representation of the 4th dimensional plane that emerges out of this infinite division of zero. In any case, if you want to, all you got to do is collapse 2 zero-dimensional points, right? And this is what emerges. This is what you see. So through the one perspective of consciousness of zero, right? Having awareness by aligning yourself back to zero, it allows for 3 things to emerge, 3 paradoxes, these 3 loops. And there we're starting to talk about my philosophy. So I'm going to stop there. But I just want to show you that there is a relationship between geometry, the dimensions, and numbers. And this is just one way to look at it. So that being said, now that's the link between everything we're talking about and spirality, or spiralism, which is the reconciliation between numbers and dimensions. Now I'm going to describe the relationship between triality and duality. It's very simple. This triangle, in order to be a triangle, necessarily includes its base, and its base is composed of 2 points. And a paradox, ironically, is a triality as well, because on both sides of the paradox, right, you have 2 loops, right? There's an intersecting point, and that's the synthesis. That's the triality part of it. But here's the beauty of it. What a paradox is really just a concept, a perfect concept that human beings cannot encompass. Therefore, it twists it into 2. And I'm going to go back to my site here to show you that. Where is it? Almost there. Nope, that's not it. There's still a lot of designs that are missing. I'm just waiting on those. There it is. Look at this. That's what consciousness does. It creates a duality out of the infinite symbol. So infinity, we already have a symbol for it. It's a circle. We can encompass infinity quite easily, which is why mathematicians and scientists are quite satisfied not going any further or probing into it, because they're like, well, yeah, there's zero, there's infinity there. And what is zero? What is it? A circle.
That's a Mobius. That's a Mobius.
Yes. It's a Mobius strip. Yeah, you can look at it as a Mobius. You can look at it as a paradox. But either way, it is infinity, and it's infinity that is warped by the mind, differentiated in a way, so that it can understand, or
So
start to
here's what I
encompass.
think. Sorry, I always keep interrupting you.
No,
I
go
think
ahead.
the Mobius strip is actually the natural state, and the zero, which is obviously duality,
Yeah.
is how we mess with it, is how we can define it in a dualistic term, right? Because
Yeah. Well,
Mobius is just one.
the way you're saying it, so that's the beauty of it, Roy. By symmetry of identity, you're also correct. You can say it's a Mobius strip that describes the zero, or the zero that describes the Mobius strip, but there's a duality there, and it's because it's superposition, and there's really only one thing, right? And that one thing, we don't say it's zero or it's a Mobius strip.
It twists through a higher dimension, doesn't it? It requires a higher dimension to do that twist.
Yeah. So, and that's why it projects into infinity to create a whole world. So that's is so, to go back to that, it's just to show you that infinity is just a triangle. So go back to triangle. It's just a shape. It's a geometric shape that you keep adding another side to. Right now, then we have a square. Then you add a pentagon, and you keep going, and you realize that a circle is just an infinite amount. It's a geometric shape with an infinite amount of sides.
Well, that's what people who would like to measure the circle will tell you, because they require lines in order to measure the circle.
Exactly. And so, I don't know how that fits into everything really, but the point is, this is infinity. It is a duality. It is a triality, because it is everything. I mean, it's just like the triune is telling you, right, that everything, it points to the zero, the nothing, or the potential of everything.
The tricky part is getting people to understand truly what a superposition is. Like, if people understood the double slit, wave function particle superposition, then that's the really good. Well, it's science's, it's basically physics metaphor for all of this.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's where the Kierkegaard's leap of faith comes in. You have to just take the leap of faith.
As metaphor, though, you have to accept it as metaphor and just make that leap, because you'll never, ever prove it for sure.
Yeah, the superposition, or the paradox, or whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
So, spirality or jumping continuity is a paradox which is resolved when we notice that the infinite series of superposed. Okay, so that's fine. Okay, so now we've discussed the language, a reconciliation of language with absolute truth. We've reconciled geometry and mathematics as well with absolute truth. There's really not too much else to do except look into a symbol now. Now, a theory of everything requires a symbol. So I've had my mother make this, and there's also this one here. I don't know which one is better. To be honest, I'd like her to have this continue really to the tip, so that it's more complete. But let's take this one here for now, and I'm going to explain how this symbol really encompasses everything we've explored up to now. So if we look at this triangle, we always have to think about the potential being at the top, the zero, and from it emerges the spiral, which is the world that we're aware of, with atoms and cells and multicells and organisms and so on. So out of that emerges, but what is that is the question, and that's where paradoxism comes in. It binds everything together. It is the superposition of the idea of existence, which is our spiral here that we're familiar with, and non-existence, which is really just potential. The superposition of both really leads to that synthesis, to that potential. So that's why you have thesis here. We're aware of a thesis, the idea, the thought, the existence, and its antithesis, right? It's perfect negation, what is called an antinomy, which is Greek for against the law. That paradox is ultimately what points to that synthesis and that truth. Okay, so ultimately, there's one more thing. You know, Daniel, when you say that your spiral reaches back into infinity and into zero, so it goes back into the past to zero, and it reaches forward into infinity, and that's where your boundary of vision is. You can't see further because we are infinitely always traveling in the present moment in time, and that's us here. That's the paradox is in the middle for a reason, because we're the ones who experience the paradox. Um, once we are generating the next level, like think about this paradox moving downwards, and so ultimately there wouldn't be a diamond here. It would be just like straight, and the spiral goes on forever, and it's just the next iteration, the next level is generated by us. That's why we can't see it, because we're the ones moving in the now, like you said, and moving forward and generating the spiral. And at the same time, the spiral is already there, which is really trippy. So everything is binded together, guys. This is really what I call the Meta-Triune as a symbol, but ultimately we have unity theory encapsulated in this symbol. And that's it. No. Now we have the technology, and I've created this protected.
Yeah, like you
This is
got
a-
to you got it. We really got to get past the okay. So what? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because
So
I guess
this is where
it's like okay. So what? Right?
Yeah, so this is where I know, Roy, it's a natural thing. I'm going to stop sharing now and going to go back to seeing you guys. Okay, so
Because it
I've,
has to
I've,
have application, otherwise it's useless.
well, no, here's the thing. I believe that there's a reason that the technology, so it's practically the massive implication of a theory of everything, a completely unified theory, is that it is applicable because it is describing the very first thing that consciousness is doing. So if you can harness that power, you are moving into the next level of awareness, right? So it is a technology. It's not just an idea, and it is
Yeah.
applicable. And I believe that what consciousness is doing is always moving human beings towards truth, so as to continue doing the self-reference to know that it exists in a way. I don't know. I don't want to give it too much of a purpose or meaning behind it, but this is the process, which is why I think we're all coming together and this is all happening, is that we are capable of harnessing the power of consciousness and awareness and apply it to very real things, because that's what's going to lead to the next paradigm shift in conscious awareness. And that's where, Roy, you're talking about, technology and like quantum computing or simulation theory. We all three of us, I know, probably looked into Ray Kurzweil, singularity, and all that stuff. It may very well be what the internet itself, right, is a consciousness coming together. I wrote a piece called the hive mind. Um, so it's really just the collection of human beings on. It's like we're like neurons connected through the internet, right? And that's the synapses basically in between neurons. And there's a higher awareness emerging from that. So I don't think it's a coincidence that we would have a technology that could be applicable to everything. Anyway, that's the part where I don't want to discuss it. I've shown you the PDF. It's password protected. I'll send it to you guys. But let's not discuss this technology thing too quickly or too publicly yet.
Yeah. Uh, what happens, Roy? That happens right now. That's the first happening. That's the first step. So I think we will see what it brings. Um, I'm not sure. mm, I have the idea now. Maybe we share our ideas separate, and then we will see how the world react, and then we have together each other to back up in different ways. So, but we will see.
What,
I am.
Daniel, what you're saying is interesting, and I'm sorry to cut you, but because I just give you the whole lecture. But here's what I think is so beautiful about a triune. It's so stable, right? That's why triangles is stable. What Roy's function seems to be is to always remind us that awareness is ultimately the thing we have to act on at all times. Because if you want to achieve perfect equilibrium in the system, and that's what consciousness is doing, I'm not worried. I think there will always be a balance. It's always generating itself. Even if humans go away and we just destroy ourselves tomorrow, that's because it was part of balancing itself. So ultimately, everything's okay. But if the consciousness does that, it generates things like us to generate that balance. So when Roy says, guys, do we continue projecting into the future, or can we just all collapse back down to one, which is what we should be doing? It's normal that he's resisting you because that's what's creating the equilibrium. And I'm in between to say, well, it's both. So that's why, like you said, it's not a coincidence, Daniel, that you're like, let's do it separately, because you are going to continue forever. You're going to die, and you might even end up teaching in university your method of applying the triune method or the unity theory to all these practical applications. You'll be talking to like physicists and engineers and teaching this stuff, and we will always have to refer back to Roy, and I'll always perhaps might have to reconcile everything that you're doing with Roy, because if you forget what Roy is talking about, you're going to go back to the regular technology, just dual thinking and the limited thinking, and it's going to unbalance the system. In fact, if you don't use this technology properly, it will debalance things, and therefore, awareness always has to be there. Do you see what I mean? It's like the balance is there always.
So if technology always requires a tool, the tool for this technology is your very consciousness. It's your very awareness.
Yeah.
And the way in which to learn how to use this tool, I think, is through meditation, because it teaches you that, first of all, there is an awareness there. And second of all, maybe that's the only free will that we have, is where we put that awareness, right? So in a way, my one-step path practice is a way of fine-tuning this tool, right?
Yeah.
For this technology.
If you do that first, then the question is, after you've done that, because here's the beauty of it. This is where guys like Roy and the gurus that meditate and they're like wicked enlightened, they just sit there. We're the ones who decide to, like, they probably could come, like they would have the ideas and be like, I'm just going to create this new invention. And maybe it's like an invention that allows you to teleport or whatever. The utility that could come from those guys would be insane. Now, that's what paradoxism does. Can I, that's what it's going to do, right? Like if I bring awareness into it, like if he stops there, paradoxism would basically help spiralism continue. Like I need to work in tandem with Roy at all times to make sure that because he has been doing, I started building the technology and he's already helping me with it. And then after, I would have to go to you and we could talk together about how to apply it not to generate the spiral, but to move forward into it. Now I'm going to give you a good example. Being as we all met on Kurt Jaimungal's platform, the Theories of Everything thing, it's kind of beautiful that this is the story I'm going to come up with. But there's a UFO guy, I keep forgetting his name, but he's super famous. He was on Joe Rogan's podcast, and he describes a technology that aliens, he was hired to reverse engineer the propulsion system of this UFO craft. And he said that it was element 115 or something like that. It's a dense material. It's like uranium, but way more dense. And it basically warps space in front of you, and you just fall. Kind of like, the experiment you do at school. You put a ball in like a stretched out piece of fabric, and you have this heavy ball in the center, and it just shows you that space and time is time is just the curvature of space. So if you put a smaller marble, it just rolls toward obviously, because it creates a funnel. Well, this is what this technology does. Basically, it just warps space in front of you, and you move forward. And that's what awareness is.
The same function as an airplane wing that just moves to lowered, right? It moves to the vacuum.
Yes,
it naturally moves to the vacuum. So you create a vacuum, and it just naturally goes into that.
Exactly. And so what's the technology that will emerge? We're already talking about it. So this is where we're gonna have to stop right after this. But the technology that would emerge from what we're talking about would be applying that concept that we're not choosing a goal. That's when I was talking to you late. I don't know.
Everything basically is moving towards us, not the other way around. We can't.
Yes. But if you see it,
this is a phase transition. Like this is serious shit, right? We are getting to the next evolutionary step, which I believe is the transcendence of thought. Like this is always my thing, is that what we're talking about is the next jump. And I believe that next jump in the natural way, in the spiritual, Hindu way, is transcendence of thought, not following it in to where thought is leading us. So
here's the thing, but here's where we go the round and round, because transcending thought would mean what? Transcending human thought or transcending? Because here's the thing.
Just quieting the voice in your head. That's basically it. There's no more voice in your head. That's where I want human consciousness to go.
Yes, but here's where this is where Daniel and I met, and I realized just how profound his theory is. What his represents, what the spiral represents, is that moving forward generally. So us applying the technology of awareness to ourselves, just being aware of all this, that technology is that awareness basically, is moving us forward into a transcendence of thought, into a higher awareness, a higher thinking in a way. Because again, if we collapse down to zero, that it's still there. Like it's still generating thought.
It's a higher level of organization, or whatever you want to put it. So it doesn't have to be the voice in your head, but there is sort of organizing intelligence that is moving in unity, and we've gotten out of that. I believe we've gotten out of that, and I think that this can realign us.
It won't be thinking the way we think about it. It'll be just like the cells don't think.
It's more of an intuition than it is based on thought. Actions that are based on thoughts are going to be karmic, and it's going to mess things up.
Exactly. Like our cells don't think the same way we do. We won't think the same way the next entity of consciousness will think. So we have to transcend thinking to get to a higher level of awareness, and that entity might call it thinking, or it might be something entirely different. I don't know. But ultimately, the application of this technology is that it's the spiral, that's happening, and I don't know. It's crazy. It's crazy. It's massive. I mean, if what we're talking about, if we're not crazy, if this checks out, we won't need to convince anyone. I think if the technology that we build is applicable and we see other people applying it to their fields, it's going to spread like wildfire. Unity theory will become the paradigm shift.
You've done an amazing job. Like way of explaining this and expressing this is, you've done a really good job. Like, frick.
we have, though. I mean,
because it's that community. The way that I communicate this stuff, that school community is not grooving on it, right? Like it's just not. But you are the intermediary. Again, you're the fucking intermediary again, right? Like you just harmonize everything and make everyone understand what we're talking about.
We're all very special in that way, because you are like the source. You're literally, you're interpreting source.
I think my shit was the motivation for all of this to come together, because both of you guys came to me. And now we're all together.
And Daniel is the crazy one, because he's the one who knows that his job will never finish, and that he's going to have the hardest job. He's going to be eternally applying this technology. And I think the career that I see will probably be like, Roy and I hanging out in the mountains, just shooting the shit, talking. Pool. Yeah, exactly. Playing pool. And then me going back to Daniel in Hungary, and where we're like working on like whiteboards and like trying to apply what I've had to because there's necessarily going to be, this is the process that's already been occurring. Like I've been trying to apply the technology. This is what Daniel, we didn't tell you this, but the technology that I started building, I had a block there, and he took it further. It's crazy. Like I ended there. I went to Roy. I showed him. He showed me a mistake that I made, and he kept it on going. He showed me the next part. Mm-hmm. And then now in my mind, I'm like, oh, now I know how that's going to apply to spiralism. And then I'm going to go back to you, and you're going to say, I know how to apply this to the next levels. Do you see what I mean? It's just, it seems to be like this pattern that's been emerging.
And it doesn't seem like we're jamming the pieces together either. The puzzle pieces.
No.
We're not doing this to try to get
No.
them to fit. Like they just seem to smoothly fit together, don't they? Like without too much of a stretch.
Yeah, the concept is there. Like it's a concept that arises out of awareness. We're not using perceptions anymore. That's what's happening.
All right, guys, that's crazy. I'm sorry. I would go now. I
Yeah,
have
that's
to
fine.
sleep tomorrow. I'm working 8 hours as well.
Yeah. One last thing. I'm just going to say
yeah.
this. I love this. It's two Canadians and a Hungarian walking into infinity, walking into infinity, walking to infinity. Like, this is it. This is it. All right. Thanks for your time, Daniel. I appreciate it. Thanks, Roy, as well.
This has been great. Thanks for making time for us, Daniel.
Thank you, guys. It's amazing. Yeah.
Let's stay in touch on the group chat.
Yeah, and yeah, I don't have to say Merry Christmas. We probably talk before that.
Oh, that's
Bye,
true.
bye,
Yeah.
guys.
It's been a few days. All right. Ciao.
All right. See you guys.